Media in Society. This is part 6 of Media and Politics. Last time we were talking about a drop in total overall political ad spending from the 2012 to the 2016 elections, and the fact that Hillary Clinton outspent the eventual winner, Donald Trump, by a 2-to-1 margin. Now this puzzled a lot of people for a couple of reasons. Number one, many thought that campaign spending was only going to climb from election to election due to things like super PACs or political action committees paying more and more to market their favorite candidates and their favorite issues. Also, candidates were seeming to get started earlier and earlier each election cycle, so it stands to reason that there would be more advertising to pay for over a longer period of time. And the fact that spending on online political advertising just keeps growing, for online advertising. So it was $650 million in 2012, and it jumped to $1.3 billion in 2016. So that's probably going to keep growing. So what I'm going to do now, though, is spend the rest of my time in this segment of Media and Politics offering some ideas that might help us start to answer, I hope, the following questions. Why did campaign spending drop in 2016? How did Donald Trump win if he and his campaign spent so much less than Hillary Clinton? And more importantly, how have Trump and his followers challenged and to a certain extent, at least for the time being, changed the logic of the relationship of media and politics? And I want to point out at the outset that I'm not a political scientist. I'm trained in media practice and research. And there are, of course, all sorts of interesting arguments to be made from the poli-sci point of view, but I'm not going to be going there here. What I'm going to try to do is to pull together some ideas from the media ecology that I've been observing since the beginning of the 2016 presidential election cycle. And also, I'm not trying to make a political statement here. I don't think I really need to. I'm more interested in discussing the political situation in the nation from the perspective of the media. I'm not endorsing one political philosophy over another, but I'm more trying to analyze what I see as some of the effects of a media sphere in significant transformation. That's more interesting to me, okay? So just want to make that clear. Let's start off by reviewing a little bit of what we were talking about in a recent lecture. We were talking about this notion of the public sphere that Jürgen Habermas has really pressed, this opportunity for people to come together and to share ideas, to participate in the political process, hopefully along with politicians and leaders who are listening to them and then going and acting accordingly in the best interests of the people, the way they see it. Now, some would argue that, especially Jürgen Habermas, that we're kind of in a bad situation, that we're having fewer and fewer opportunities to participate. Now, some, though, argue, as I said before, that the media have provided new venues, new spaces for such public deliberation. Interestingly, first candidate and now President Trump has done a very effective job convincing his followers that the information and messaging of many of the traditional media sources are suspect. As you know, many news reports that seem to question Trump's values and intentions are labeled by Trump and his followers to be fake and fabricated by what he characterizes as un-American members of the media, the news media especially, bent on dragging down the nation. Now, meantime, despite often maligning the media for being too liberal, President Trump does have the support of right-wing leaning media institutions, including Fox News, as you know, and the Sinclair Broadcast Group system, which owns numerous local radio and TV stations across the country. And there are other media outlets as well. The Wall Street Journal tends to skew a little more to the right, although they've been critical of Trump in the past as well. But it's not true that all of the media are set against him. So just want to kind of get that out there. Trump also has some advantages in terms of what we were talking about before as well, and that is electronic populism. That is the use of radio and television and now increasingly interactive online communication to appeal to the interests of, quote, ordinary people. Now again, as I said before, who gets to be labeled as ordinary really depends on where you stand in terms of values and politics. It's really important to understand that different values would believe that different people represent the sort of common folk. Some argue these platforms, these electronic populist platforms, give voice to the marginalized, the disaffected, people who perhaps don't feel like they're part of the public sphere and they can't participate in the conversation. But others argue the closed nature of these electronic populist venues makes it really easy to preach to the choir without any fear of real criticism, no challenge, and no negotiation or adaptation. Another advantageous reality for President Trump is the rise of another concept we considered, and that is the commodification of the political candidate over time, and the allure of stimulation over substance, the visual, the tactile, over the literary, the cerebral, the sort of the deeper meanings. And remember that I was referencing in the Daisy commercial, the one that showed a little girl picking flower petals as a nuclear missile launched, and political consultant Tony Schwartz produced the ad, and he said, quote, "The best political commercials do not tell the viewer anything. They surface his or her feelings, and they provide a context for them to express those feelings." And I think a lot of people would say that Donald Trump really exploited that quite well. He's very good at that, and it's something he might have learned in his business background in the real estate world. I also believe that Trump was helped by the needs of the 24/7 news cycle, which we haven't, I believe, talked about yet. Just one example, since the debut in 1980 of CNN, cable news network, this is TV's first 24-hour cable news channel. That network and others have emerged since then, and they need material to communicate about. Analysts have identified literal changes brought about by CNN. First, these sorts of platforms can have a strong agenda-setting effect, especially in times of crisis, as everyone tunes in to find out, hey, what's been going on in wherever place that some crisis, some disaster is happening. And the story they tell, for a while at least, is the only story that viewers can know at the time. So in a way, they're trapped within the context of that story. That's the agenda that they set. They don't tell us what to think exactly, but they tell us kind of where we can think and what we can think about. They call this the CNN effect. This results in great power affecting our politics and our views of the world. Often, if the story wasn't covered by CNN, it isn't known at all. People aren't even aware of it if it's not broken by the media in some way. So with that in mind, CNN has made sure that we know a lot about Donald Trump from the very beginning. From the start of his campaign, CNN seemed to be obsessed with covering everything Trump did. Driven by Trump's regular, yet, as you know, often unpredictable tweets, he seemed to be the perfect filler for CNN's news hole. So despite CNN's often critical coverage of Trump, and I think it is pretty critical often, some have questioned the extent to which Trump provides the news channel with higher ratings, and therefore they can't resist focusing on him. So kind of what's going on here? Christopher Ingraham of the Washington Post reported in April of 2017, when he was talking about the election and the costs of the election, he said Trump benefited immensely in his presidential campaign from earned media. That's what he called it, earned media. This is free TV time that he got by virtue of being an unconventional candidate who frequently said outlandish and offensive things. Trump received about $5 billion in free media, that according to an estimate by the media analysis firm MediaQuant. We can see then that Trump is adept at effectively sidestepping gatekeepers, especially of traditional media, while forcing the media to pay attention to him, often then keeping those gatekeepers off balance. And I know people can be very critical of Trump, but I think he's quite the master at that sort of thing, at sort of obfuscation and sort of changing and twisting and making him hard to sort of get a hold of. And we can't ignore the importance of ratings. Because these media companies are now often smaller holdings in much larger multinational corporations, then business values can often overrule journalistic values. So it's often the bottom line over the well-researched and crafted news story. So there's just great incentive out there in this corporate model to get as many people as possible to be, observing, to put their eyeballs on your media content. So the content with higher ratings, with more people watching and listening, that is more valued, and a lot of people like to watch and listen to Donald Trump, whether they like him or hate him. So Donald Trump, with his well-honed experience in reality TV, we can't ignore that, and a flair for the dramatic, probably from his past real estate holdings, he's almost a perfect subject for today's cameras and microphones. The media institutions almost have no choice but to watch, to record, and to share his every move, his every utterance, and more likely his almost daily tweets. So another important factor in President Trump's success is really the evolution of mobile and internet-based communication. I believe the sheer openness of the internet enables a huge number of people to record events and to comment on them and to share with potentially most of the planet if you can find the right avenues. And due to automated gatekeeping functions made possible by algorithmic sorting software, I would call it, we're experiencing representations of people and places and things and events more regularly and more rapidly than anyone could have imagined not very long ago. But this openness and this speed, the lack of true gatekeepers, this inability often to trace information back to its sources, has also allowed in questionable elements, I would say, such as Russian hackers and many other questionable elements around the world who are intent on doing some bad things, including manipulate public opinion. So these people orchestrate the sharing of these upsetting accounts of situations that perhaps never really happened. In what is often known as fake news, these things are intended to hurt the reputation of one political side or the other. And in a related way, they also attempt to manipulate trends and patterns in internet behavior, which is assumed to reflect public opinion, but those reflections are not accurate. Okay? So, related to all this, we're seeing what I call the algorithmic effect. Not exactly fake news, but the partial news phenomenon, I guess you could call it, especially in social media. So social media leaders, not wishing to offend their users, platforms like Facebook, things like that, they attempt to sidestep offense by tailoring everyone's unique newsfeed to present agreeable information while avoiding unsettling messages. So the result, in this case, those who like Trump experience more positive communication about the president. Those who don't like Trump experience more negative views about the president. And this may then drive a deeper wedge between the opposing views. We lose the ability to interact, to converse, to sort of do those things in the public sphere that Jürgen Habermas thought we needed to do to be a healthy society. So returning to my original questions, why did the campaign spending drop? How did Trump win if he spent less? How has Trump challenged the relationship between media and politics? Again, the political scientists can answer these questions in ways that I really can't. But I can help us understand the role of media in the Trump phenomenon. In answer to the first and second questions, as discussed, Trump did not spend as much on campaign advertising because he didn't have to. He was the perfect stimulant, I think, for this day and this age, for a media ecology that's hungry for competitive content. As far as how he won if he spent less, that's a bit more complex, I think. Again, he had plenty of free, earned media coverage, right? That was kind of free media coverage. Thanks to his nationalistic America First message, he had a strong following in the electronic populist media. And he might have had help in the social media realm thanks to Russian hackers. That said, many researchers wonder how much fake news sways more than the undecided voters. Let me repeat that. They've done research that shows that most people are not fooled by fake news. So if there were Russian hackers, could they have actually made a difference? Then again, his margin of victory was so close that maybe they didn't have to make too much of a difference to make a difference, if you know what I mean. So perhaps the most interesting question for this course involves that final one, the relationship between media and politics. Where is it at right now? Trump's candidacy was at least helped, I think, perhaps quite a lot, by this intersection of media and other social forces that we have never seen before. And what, of course, no one knows is where this is all heading. Is President Trump taking the lead in dismantling crony politics and capitalism? Is he a true voice for the hardworking American people? That's what he tells us that he is. Or is he, in his unprecedented time in presidential office, is it better viewed as the outcome of a massive collision of competing value systems, of which the media are a significant participant? Ultimately, what does it all mean for the future of media? What does it mean for the future of politics, the future of the nation, and the future of the world? And with those currently unanswerable questions, we end part 6 of Media and Politics.